Your F-150's EcoBoost turbo is being destroyed by a habit that feels completely normal, and almost every owner does it without realizing what is happening under the hood. I am talking about a routine so common that most people would never connect it to engine damage. I have been a Ford technician for over 15 years, and I have torn into more prematurely failed turbos than I can count. The pattern is always the same: good trucks, low miles, and one habit repeated thousands of times that quietly cooked the turbo from the inside out. Today, I am breaking down exactly what this habit is, why it is so damaging, and the simple fix that adds years back on to your engine's life. Let us get into it. The habit is shutting off your engine immediately after hard driving, towing, or highway use. It sounds harmless. You pull into your driveway, into a gas station, or into a parking lot after a long haul, and you turn the key off the second you're parked. Almost every F-150 owner does this without thinking twice. But on a turbocharged EcoBoost engine, that split-second decision is doing real damage every single time you do it. Here's what's actually happening mechanically. When you drive hard, tow a trailer, merge onto the highway, or climb a grade, the turbocharger spins at speeds that can exceed 150,000 revolutions per minute. At those speeds, the turbine wheel on the exhaust side is glowing with heat, sometimes reaching temperatures over 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. The center section of the turbo, where the shaft rides on a thin film of oil between two bearings, is sitting right next to that heat. The only thing keeping that bearing from cooking is a continuous flow of oil moving through the center housing, carrying heat away and keeping the shaft lubricated. When you shut the engine off immediately after this kind of driving, that oil flow stops instantly. The oil pump stops turning and no more fresh, cool oil is moving through the turbo center section. But the heat doesn't stop. The turbine housing and the surrounding metal are still radiating enormous amounts of heat into the center section, and now there's no circulation to carry it away. This is called heat soak, and it's one of the most damaging things that can happen inside a turbocharger. The oil sitting in the center section when you shut the engine off gets trapped there, and it absorbs all that residual heat with nowhere to go. Engine oil, even good synthetic oil, has a breaking point. Under this kind of extreme, stagnant heat exposure, the oil starts to cook. It oxidizes and forms hard carbon deposits, a process technicians call coking. This coked oil residue builds up inside the turbo's oil passages, around the bearings, and on the shaft itself. Once coking begins, it restricts oil flow even during normal operation afterward, which means the turbo runs hotter and with less lubrication every time you drive it going forward. It's a snowball effect. Each hard shutdown makes the next one slightly worse. I've pulled turbos out of F-150s with well under 100,000 miles that looked like they belonged in a truck with 300,000 miles on it. Blackened, varnished oil passages, bearing surfaces with visible scoring, shaft play you could feel by hand. In almost every one of these cases, when I talked to the owner, the story was the same. They towed regularly, drove hard on the highway, or worked the truck hard, and then shut it off right away every single time. None of them knew this was a problem. Ford does not put a warning light on your dash for it. There is no chime, no message, nothing that tells you that you just heat-soaked your turbo bearings. The damage happens silently, and by the time you notice symptoms, thousands of miles of accumulated damage have already occurred. The symptoms of turbo bearing damage from repeated heat soak show up gradually, so most owners don't connect the dots. You might notice a slight whining or whistling sound from the engine bay that wasn't there before. This is often the earliest sign of bearing wear, caused by increased shaft play changing the clearances inside the turbo. Next, you might notice blue-tinted exhaust smoke on startup or during hard acceleration. This happens because worn bearings allow oil to seep past the seals and get burned in the turbine or compressor side. Reduced boost pressure and sluggish acceleration often follow because a turbo with excessive shaft play can't spool as efficiently. Eventually, you're looking at complete turbo failure, sometimes catastrophically, where the compressor wheel makes contact with the housing and destroys itself while the engine is running. The cost of this failure is significant. A turbo replacement on most EcoBoost F-150 engines runs between $1,500 and $2,800. depending on the model year and whether you are using OEM or aftermarket parts. On trucks with the 3.5-liter EcoBoost twin-turbo setup, replacing both turbos at once, which is often recommended since they wear at similar rates, can push that number toward $3,500 to $4,500 with labor. And if a turbo fails catastrophically while the engine is running, metal fragments from the compressor or turbine wheel can get pulled into the intake or exhaust system, causing secondary engine damage that multiplies the repair bill significantly. Now here's the part that really gets people. This entire problem is almost completely preventable, and the fix costs nothing. It just requires changing one small habit. After hard driving, towing, highway use, or any situation where the engine has been working under load, you need to let the engine idle for a short cool-down period before shutting it off. This gives the oil pump time to keep circulating oil through the turbo center section while the turbine housing gradually sheds its extreme heat. The oil carries that heat away safely instead of letting it cook in place. For most normal driving situations, even spirited highway merging or moderate load, 30 seconds to a minute of idling before shutdown is enough. For sustained towing, climbing long grades, or driving in extreme heat, extending that cool-down period to 2 to 3 minutes gives the turbo enough time to stabilize. You don't need any special equipment to do this. You don't need a turbo timer, though some aftermarket ones exist for exactly this purpose. All it takes is discipline. When you pull into your driveway after towing a trailer or after a hard highway run, resist the urge to shut the engine off the instant you're in park. Let it idle. Check your phone, grab your things out of the back seat, walk around, and check your trailer hitch, whatever gives the engine a minute or two to cool down naturally. That short pause is the single most effective thing you can do to protect your turbo's lifespan. There's a common misconception I need to address here because it confuses a lot of owners. Many people think this cool-down concern only applies to older, turbocharged vehicles with less advanced cooling systems. Modern EcoBoost engines do have water-cooled turbo bearing housings, which is a real improvement over older air-cooled and purely oil-cooled designs. After you shut the engine off, the coolant system uses a feature called after-run coolant circulation on some models, where a small electric pump continues circulating coolant through the turbo housing for a period of time after shutdown, specifically to combat heat soak. This is a great engineering solution, but it is not a complete substitute for proper cool-down idling, and here's why. The after-run coolant pump helps manage heat in the housing and jacket around the turbo, but it does very little for the actual oil sitting inside the center bearing section at the moment of shutdown. That trapped oil film between the shaft and the bearings is still exposed to residual heat conducted directly through the metal, and coolant circulation around the outside of the housing can't fully prevent that localized coking process. The after-run pump buys you some protection, but it's not a license to ignore cool-down habits, especially after towing or extended hard use. Another mistake I see constantly is owners who tow or drive hard and then immediately hit a drive-through, a gas station, or a parking lot and shut off the engine to run inside for 5 or 10 minutes. This is actually one of the worst-case scenarios for heat soak because you're combining the immediate shutdown with an extended period where the engine sits completely off while the turbo is still radiating maximum heat into that trapped oil. If you know you're going to make a quick stop right after hard driving, let the truck idle and park for a minute before you shut it off, even if it means sitting there for 60 seconds before you go inside. That 1 minute of patience protects thousands of dollars of turbocharger hardware. Short trips are another factor that compounds this problem, though in a slightly different way. If you mostly drive short distances around town, your engine often doesn't get enough time to reach full operating temperature, which means the oil never properly burns off condensation and fuel dilution that accumulates from cold starts. Combine a pattern of short cold trips with occasional hard towing runs, where you shut off immediately afterward, and you've created close to worst-case conditions for turbo longevity. The oil is already somewhat degraded from repeated cold start dilution, and then it gets hit with extreme heat soak on top of that. If this describes your driving pattern, sticking to a shorter oil change interval, generally every 5,000 miles instead of stretching to 7,500 or 10,000, gives you a meaningful buffer of protection. Oil quality plays a role here too. And it's worth mentioning because it ties directly into how well your turbo survives heat soak events. Ford specifies full synthetic oil for EcoBoost engines for good reason. Synthetic oil has a significantly higher resistance to thermal breakdown and coking compared to conventional oil. If you or a previous owner ever used conventional or blended oil in an EcoBoost-equipped F-150, that engine has likely experienced accelerated turbo wear regardless of shutdown habits because the oil simply couldn't handle the heat as well. Always confirm you're using a full synthetic oil that meets Ford's WSS M2C946A or newer specification, and never let anyone talk you into a cheaper conventional oil change to save a few dollars on a turbocharged engine. Towing amplifies every part of this problem, which is why F-150 owners who tow regularly are the group I see turbo failures in most often. When you're pulling a trailer, the engine works significantly harder for extended periods, generating more heat, spinning the turbo faster and for longer stretches of time compared to unloaded driving. If you tow regularly and you're in the habit of shutting off immediately after backing the trailer into your driveway or unhooking at a campsite, you are doing this damage repeatedly, trip after trip. This is exactly the profile of the trucks I see coming in with turbo failures well before 100,000 miles. If towing is a regular part of your life with this truck, the cool-down habit isn't optional. It's essential maintenance, just as important as checking your tire pressure or greasing your hitch. Hot climates make this whole situation even worse, and it's something owners in southern states rarely think about. On a 100-degree day, the ambient underhood temperature is already elevated before you even start driving. Add a hard highway pull or a stretch of towing on top of that, and the turbo is fighting against baseline heat that's far higher than what an owner in a cooler climate deals with. If you live somewhere with consistently hot summers, extend your cool-down idle time slightly beyond what you'd use in mild weather. An extra 30 seconds costs you nothing, but it gives the oil more time to carry away heat that's already fighting an uphill battle against the outside air temperature. The same logic applies at high altitude, where the engine and turbo often have to work harder to produce the same power, which means more heat generated per mile driven, even without towing anything. There's also a version of this problem that shows up with remote start systems, and it's worth addressing directly because I get asked about it constantly. Some owners assume that using remote start to shut the engine down from a distance somehow helps with cool down, but it doesn't work that way. Remote start is designed to warm up or cool down the cabin before you get in, not to manage a cool down period after hard driving. If you use your key fob or phone app to shut the engine off remotely right after you park following a hard drive, you're causing the exact same instant shutdown and heat soak as if you turned the key off manually. The only thing that actually protects the turbo is time spent idling with oil circulating before the engine shuts down completely, regardless of whether that shutdown happens by key, button, or remote app. I also want to address aftermarket turbo timers since they come up constantly in towing circles. These are small devices, popular in the performance and diesel truck world for decades, that let you remove your key or press a button to lock the truck while the device keeps the engine idling on its own for a preset period before shutting it down automatically. For F-150 owners who tow constantly or who know themselves well enough to admit they'll forget the habit, a turbo timer can be a worthwhile investment, usually costing $150 to $300 installed. That said, you do not need one. This is a habit you can build entirely for free. A turbo timer is a convenience for people who want a guaranteed backstop, not a requirement for protecting your engine. Most of the owners I know who tow heavily and have never had a turbo problem simply train themselves to sit in the driveway for 60 seconds before reaching for the key every single time without exception. If you're finding this useful, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe now, because next I'm going to walk you through exactly how to tell if your turbo has already been damaged by this habit and what you can realistically do about it before it turns into a full turbo replacement. So how do you know if the damage has already started? Pay attention to a few specific signs. Listen for any new whining, whistling, or hissing sound from the engine bay, particularly during acceleration or right as you let off the throttle. This is often the first audible clue of bearing wear. Watch your exhaust on cold starts and hard acceleration for any hint of blue smoke, which indicates oil is getting past worn seals. Pay attention to boost response. If your truck used to pull hard and now feels like it's hesitating or building power more slowly than it used to, especially at higher revolutions per minute, that can indicate reduced turbo efficiency from bearing wear or shaft play. And if you ever notice a burning oil smell, especially after a hard drive, get the truck inspected soon, because that can mean oil is actually reaching hot exhaust components. If you catch the problem early, before full bearing failure, there are steps that can help slow further damage. Switching to a shorter oil change interval immediately helps remove any accumulated coked residue before it builds up further and gives fresh oil a chance to keep newer deposits from hardening. Some technicians, myself included, will use a turbo-safe engine flush designed specifically for coked oil passages, though this needs to be done carefully and is not appropriate for every situation. So it is worth having a shop that specializes in EcoBoost engines make that call. If shaft play is already noticeable by hand or the whining has become persistent and loud, you are likely past the point where flushing helps, and turbo replacement or a professional turbo rebuild becomes the realistic path forward. Rebuilding a turbo core with new bearings, seals, and a balanced shaft assembly typically costs less than full OEM replacement, often in the $600 to $1,200 range depending on the shop, and can be a smart option if the turbine and compressor wheels themselves are still in good condition. The bigger picture here is this. Your F-150's turbocharger is an incredibly engineered piece of hardware capable of spinning faster than almost anything else in your vehicle, generating serious power while keeping fuel economy reasonable. But that performance comes with a trade-off. It runs extremely hot, and it depends entirely on continuous oil flow to survive that heat. The habit of shutting the engine off the instant you are done driving hard is so ingrained and so automatic that almost nobody thinks about it. But it is directly working against the one thing that keeps your turbo alive. The fix costs you nothing except a minute or two of patience after towing, hard highway driving, or heavy load use. That's an incredibly small price to pay to avoid a repair bill that can run into the thousands of dollars. One last thing worth mentioning because it ties everything together. This habit does not just affect the turbo in isolation. A turbo that has been repeatedly heat-soaked and is running with restricted oil flow eventually starts sending contaminated coke debris downstream into the rest of the engine's oil system. That means the same damage that started in the turbo center section can gradually affect bearing surfaces elsewhere in the engine over enough time and enough miles. Protecting the turbo is not just about protecting a single $2,000 part. It is about protecting the entire lubrication system that keeps your whole engine alive. Start paying attention today. After your next towing trip or hard highway run, before you shut the engine off, just let it idle for a minute. Make it a habit every single time, not just when you remember. Your turbo, your wallet, and your truck's long-term reliability will all benefit from those 60 seconds. If you found this helpful, make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment letting me know if this is a habit you've been guilty of. Share this with any F-150 owner you know who tows or drives hard, because this is the kind of thing nobody tells you until the repair bill is already on the counter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.